Welcome back, brothers and sisters. I am Braden. This is Tim, and this is Second Legacy. And thank you so much for stopping by. Now, you might see one of us somewhere on the internet, him with Military Arms Channel and me with Langley Outdoors, but this is a new channel that we are collaborating on, and we would love to have you jump in the fold with us. Make sure you subscribe, turn the notification bell on, leave some comments, and spread this out because we really feel that this can make a difference. And today, we're going to dive into a few of the things a little outside of the norm. We're going to dive into Canada because even the Canadians have had enough of gun control. This is something that we're seeing in a lot of different areas, and there's a direct tie-in to what we do every single day in our own channels, in our own conversations. Everything we do is about driving forward with freedom. And like I said, even the Canadians are sick of it. So with that, Tim, say hello. Let's get into this. What are we going to talk about with Canada?
So there's an interesting article from AmmoLand that's talking about C-21, which is a bill in Canada that Trudeau was touting as being some great, legislative accomplishment that basically added 1,500 long guns to the list of prohibited banned items, and then also banned the, sale, transfer, ownership of handguns in Canada. And boy, he was just proud of himself. He could not be more proud of himself. If you watch some of the television interviews that he gave, he could not slap himself any harder on the back without breaking ribs. And it was interesting to watch because almost immediately Canadians around the country and in various provinces vowed to ignore this law. So you had, much like what we've talked about in previous episodes here on Second Legacy, what's going on in the United States when sheriffs say we're not going to enforce this, when states say we're not going to enforce this, whatever the federal government does. Here we see the same thing happening in Canada. So in my summation, this is just, the way I see things is that these politicians have had such success in pushing their woke agendas globally in multiple different countries that just basically unopposed, people are just sitting by letting these agendas get pushed through, that apparently Trudeau thought, well, he had the political capital because all these other woke initiatives were just going through unimpeded. We'll just slide in some heavy-handed gun control and just basically outright ban handguns and added 1,500 more long guns to the list of banned items. And people just put their foot down and said, absolutely not. Now they're being forced to walk this one back. They're doing the walk of shame. And it's interesting to see this happen, especially after provinces have chimed in and said, yeah, you can do this, but we're not enforcing it. And that creates a crisis at the government level when states, in our case, and provinces, in their case, push back against federal action and say, oh, no, actually, we're not going to allow that. And so that's why they're being forced to walk this one back. Now, will it get walked back? I don't know, but we have some interesting points from the AmmoLand article.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. And to your point, before we get into this is not just Canada. This is not just United States, individual states. This is an act. Understand, this is people who just have had enough. Quite honestly, you've got a lot of forward momentum back here at home with the different states that are passing constitutional carry. They've passed a lot of pro-firearm legislation over the past 2 years while the Biden administration has been in place. We still have the ability to make gains. And what you're seeing here, the consistent element, you've got Canadian individuals, the population of Canada coming up and saying, no more. And the second that bluff is called, that's when the government has an issue, when the controlling power gets called and they consistently backstep everything. You've seen this a bunch of times, and we'll hit on probably later in this video, about states with AR bans that do the exact same thing here in the United States. And then they subtly and just quietly don't mention it again because they can't lose face. And that's an incredibly important piece of this, because when we stand up as individuals, put the right people in the right places in your local state governments, put them in the federal government at your House representative level, and your Senate level. It's not just the top of the ticket. It's everything below that has an equal, if not greater amount of power. But let me read this first piece here, and then we're going to get into it. Mr. Producer, if you could throw up number 1, that would be amazing. So in the face of furious backlash against changes proposed to Bill C-21, because they changed things, we're going to talk about that in a second, Canada's Liberal government has dropped 2 expansive amendments to the bill. Gun rights groups, opposition politicians, and ordinary Canadians opposed the bill because it would not only criminalize mainstream hunting and sport shooting firearms lawfully owned by millions of individuals, guns that play no role in crime, but lacks any redeeming public safety benefits. Now, a lot of those things that I just read to you, how many of those correlate directly to the United States and some of the things that we're seeing here? Tim, pick your favorite. What do you think?
Well, I think this, goes back to what I was saying before. You know, here you have the federal government in Canada overreaching, thinking that they had the political capital to accomplish this sweeping ban. And you have Canadian people, Canadian groups, Canadian politicians, and provinces pushing back saying, no. And keep in mind, folks, the Canadians don't have the same freedoms that we have here in the United States. For example, we in the United States have the ability to use lethal force if it's justified in self-defense. Now, it varies from state to state. I can only talk about the state that I live in. We can use lethal force to defend ourselves, family members. We can even intervene in a robbery in a store that, if the perp is threatening somebody else's life, hasn't pointed the gun at me, I can still intervene and be a good Samaritan and end that robbery. So we have that right here in the United States and most of the 50 states in the Union. The Canadians have never had that, right? Well, I can't say they've never had that, but in recent times, modern times, they don't have that right. They can't carry a handgun for the purposes of self-defense. So they talk about everything with regards to sport shooting, hunting, things like that. So that's why you see the wording the way that it is, because they don't have a constitution protecting their right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and being able to use deadly force if justified in self-defense. So the Canadians are looking at this in a slightly different perspective. They see this as, you're taking away my handguns that I hunt with. You're taking away my rifles that I hunt with. You're just taking away sport firearms, guns I just want to go to the range and enjoy. And again, Canada is they have a lot of gun ownership. It's very much part of their culture, even though they don't have self-defense per se. It's very much of their culture. Mm-hmm. So with this move by Trudeau's government, they have offended the base of the Canadian culture, the people that live in the rural areas outside of the cities, much like what we see in the United States. Chicago's perfectly content with gun bans, but you go downstate in Illinois, they're not perfectly content with their gun bans because you have city folks opposing rural folks. And Canada's a very rural country, and they love their hunting. They love the ability to own and use their firearms. So this directly attacked them, and it was a bridge too far. And now they're pushing back, and they're pushing back hard to the point where Trudeau's government is having to walk this back to some degree.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think one of the most important things you just said, it was a cultural attack. So kind of going back to what you said prior, when you've got so much pressure put on a culture to change laws, to abuse well-known norms, to go beyond what people are typically used to dealing with, until you get to a certain breaking point. At a certain point, you go too far into the culture and you just start getting annoying. At a certain point, people start going, we heard you earlier. We still hear you. Could you talk a little quieter, please? And then it turns into, okay, enough, go sit in the corner. And that's where this eventually always ends up. You're going to push and push and push until you meet that resistance level. And in this case, Trudeau came out. I mean, Tim, I don't know if you remember this, but he openly said, you don't have a right to a firearm in the country of Canada. He said that on national TV.
Yeah.
And it was very clear. I mean, if you look at the next quote, Mr. Producer, I'll just throw a short little snippet here. Quote, help stop the growth of personally owned handguns in Canada. Help stop the growth of personally owned handguns in Canada. That is literally a quote. I mean, yeah. It's not like, well, there's this conspiracy. He said it,
right?
Like openly.
And here's what's interesting about that. So they're looking for a justification for this move. And in the United States, they always want to cite crime as the reason why they want to ban firearms. In Canada, they have a high ownership of firearms, but they don't have the same societal and economic problems that we have, mostly in our major cities, that drive the crime rate. Right? Violence isn't a gun issue, it's a people issue. And the Canadians are examples of that. So they can't really cite crime as the reason they want to do this because they don't really have any crime to speak of. And so they're going to say, well, we just want to help stop the growth of personally owned handguns in Canada. That's the reason for this drastic move. Because we can.
No, 100%.
Like, what in the world are you thinking? You can't even give a just reason for it. You're just saying, we just don't think you should be able to own handguns in Canada, so we're just going to take them away. There's no real reason. We can't really say people are dying because they're being misused. All we can say is, just really don't need them, so we're going to take them away.
We don't like them. Yeah. And to that point, Mr. Producer, if you could put up number 3, I want to read something, and you guys tell us in the comments if this sounds at all familiar. On January 19th, Liberal MP Brendan Hanley from Yukon hosted a round table. There's your first coincidence. Meeting with concerned citizens in Whitehorse and the federal minister of public safety, Marco Mendocino, who has maintained that, quote, the government has no intention whatsoever to go after long guns and hunting rifles. Interesting. The minister began his remarks at the meeting with the usual liberal platitude around, quote, my respect for you and for others who are responsible gun owners. There's your second. Be you hunters, farmers, collectors, trappers, you name it. There's a stigma or stereotype that we don't value that relationship. That is simply not true. We do, end quote. Now, if you come back to the United States, I mean, me and Tim focus on this to a hyper attentive level. But how many times have you guys heard or seen a liberal or Democratic politician here start to say with, I'm from a hunting family. I love our tradition of firearms. We just need common sense gun control. That's really what we need. Common sense, say, gun safety. We need to attack the gun culture in this country. All the different platitudes, they're the exact same. Mm-hmm. Like if I could do a side by side, there are no differences. Trudeau comes out, he doesn't have the barriers that Biden does. We have the Bill of Rights to prevent these things from happening, but the language, the verbiage, the desires, and the outcomes would be identical if not for our blessings of the Bill of Rights.
Yes, and I think that's what's important here, folks. This serves as an example. So as we saw in the last clip, that basically these politicians are saying, look, I'm a gun owner too, and I think you should be able to own guns too, but I'm pro 2A, but I'm not a racist, but this is how people preface something they claim they're not, and they turn right around and say something that makes it true that they are. And in this case, they're gun grabbers, right? I'm pro-gun, but, and then they throw in the qualifiers of reasonable gun owners. You're reasonable if you agree to hand over your guns to us. You're reasonable if you agree that you should only have 10 rounds in a magazine. You're reasonable if you agree that AR-15s really shouldn't be owned, but you can have a Mini 14. You're reasonable. I could just go down the list of this stuff. And then they always say that, we value the relationship with the Second Amendment. Well, in this case, the gun owning community of Canada. No, you don't. Right. C-21 proves you don't. What you're doing is trying to pacify people with this hand while the other hand is over here snatching their guns. And people have had enough of this. I know that we've had enough of it in the United States. We can see that playing out almost every day. And now the Canadians are starting to push back, and good for them. Unfortunately, they don't have a Second Amendment they can fall back upon, and the court systems and stuff like that. I don't know how that would play out in Canada, but it's a hot mess. But it's interesting to see that they're running into stiff opposition to this, because this goes back again that usually in political movements, you have a minority of people that are extremely noisy, and they get the attention of the media, they get the attention of the politicians, but they don't necessarily represent the views of the whole, of the entire body, right? They're just the loudest, the squeakiest wheel, so they get their agenda pushed forward. Gun owners tend to be pretty quiet folk. We're just regular law-abiding working class, just regular people. And we don't really want to go out there and protest. We don't really want to go out there and make loud noises until you go too far. And that's not just the case with firearms ownership. That's just politics in general. You can use the whole woke movement as an example of that. People just sit back and let it happen, because they don't want to be that person that goes out there and they're also scared of being labeled various things if they push back. But once you go to a certain point, well, now you've kicked the lion, and now the lion's mad. And that would be the majority of the people. And in this case, the Canadians, the majority is saying, no, Trudeau, we're not going to put up with this. Yeah. And that's how you're getting this pushback. And that's what it takes. Even in a non-constitutional society that doesn't have a Bill of Rights that protects that right to own a firearm.
No, and I think that's an excellent way to kind of wind down this conversation, because what they tried to do was they said, we're just going to stop the import and the manufacture. You know what? Any transfer of any kind of handguns through C-21. We covered it consistently on my channel. I know you touched on it. But the big thing that they did at the end was they said, oh, and by the way, we're going to throw a little amendment in there that catches everything else. Yeah. So we're just not going to have it. And the important piece was that was the move on the chessboard. That was the checkmate move. The people of Canada, they didn't come out and start openly protesting. They just literally said, yeah, nah, we're not going to do that. So much so that the Canadian government, who has complete power, is backing off that amendment. Now,
Yep.
C-21 is still a thing. I'm not saying it's all puppies and rainbows, but that speaks to the power of what we're talking about.
Yep. And it gives a voice to the people, and it just goes to serve, or goes to show, I should say, that your voice does matter. It doesn't matter if you're a Canadian citizen or an American citizen. Your voice does matter. I grow weary of seeing, folks in the 2A community saying, my vote doesn't count. My voice doesn't matter. I'm not going to contact my representatives. Doesn't matter. Mine's anti-gun. Just a litany of excuses as to why they're not politically active. And this is how we lose our rights. This is how we go down that road of total confiscation. This is how we go down the road of losing our Fourth and Fifth Amendment protections. All it takes is people to sit by and do nothing, and to think that their vote doesn't count, or they just don't want to be politically active because they're just unengaged. That's how we become a non-free society, and that's how we lose our rights. So that's why we have the Second Legacy. That's why this channel exists. We want to give you information so you can have these discussions with your fellow family members, friends, and coworkers, because these are important conversations to have. We need to sway people to our side of the argument. We have the facts on our side. We have the truth on our side, and we have the Constitution on our side. And so we hope to enable you guys and gals to be able to take the information that we share with you, present it to those that may oppose gun ownership in the United States, and sway that opinion, and also become politically active, because that is how we save our republic and our rights. Thank you for tuning in. If you'd be so kind as to like, share, and subscribe to this video and to the channel, that would be awesome. Please let other folks know that we're here, and post that link on social media, share it all around, and get folks coming over, because with you and the growth, we can spread this message even further and wider. And that is the whole goal of the Second Legacy. Until next time, we'll talk to you guys soon.